Hello, everyone. I'm Zina Brebois, Research Fellow at the Hudson Institute at the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East. And it's with great pleasure that we have you today to discuss with two distinguished fellows, the director of the Center for Peace and Security and a senior fellow as well, Michael Doran, as well as Bernard Haykel, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute as well. And we will talk about Trump's recent visit in the Gulf, as well as other regional issues. Why don't we start with a few remarks from both of you about what you have seen, what you have noticed from Trump's visit?
Well, thank you first for inviting me, and it's lovely to be here. I would say most people have focused on the investments that he was able to, the commitments to investments in the United States that he was able to garner in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, a total of about $2.4 trillion in promises over several years. I think that's, there's a question mark as to how much of this will ever materialize. Some of it will, for sure. Some of it is already are things that these countries have committed in terms of weapons purchases and so on from the United States and investments. But the more significant, I think, aspect of the visit are the connections that were made under President Trump's auspices between American businesses, specifically in AI, and the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries basically want to, especially Saudi Arabia, to a lesser extent the UAE, want to side with the United States in the competition over artificial intelligence between China and the United States. And that's a major decision, because if they do that, it means they would have to cut their ties with China when it comes to military procurement as well as technology and AI. And so that's a structural sort of shift towards the United States and a commitment to the United States. And that seems to have gone through. This was something that was already being discussed under the Biden administration in the last 2 years of the Biden administration, and it has come to fruition now under President Trump. That, I think, is probably the most significant aspect of the trip.
Yeah, Mike.
So, actually, before I say what my takeaways are, with your permission, can I ask Bernie a follow-up question? I've only recently begun to really get my head around this AI question and the place of it in the place of the Middle East and the Gulf in the AI competition. And I have formed an impression, and I want to ask you if it's correct. My impression is that this is going to be extremely important. That the Gulf is a huge asset that will fall either to the Chinese or the Americans, not just because of the money, but also because of the energy that they have available to build these AI centers. My understanding is that on the American side, one of the things that's impeding us is coming up with a supply of energy for these centers. Do I have that right, or am I thinking about it correctly?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there essentially, if you look at Saudi Arabia as a place where you would have data centers, you'd have major tech centers for AI innovation. The Saudis can offer three things: land. They have a lot of land. They can offer energy for free. And energy is not just the fact that they have gas and oil, but also solar. They're super well endowed in solar and wind. And three, they have a very low regulatory environment, to a non-existing regulatory environment. So the Chinese develop AI without regulations, without any guardrails. We don't do that here. In the United States, we do. And that, in a way, is both a good thing, but it's also a hindrance, because you can't deploy AI the way the Chinese do. So I'll give you an example, a kind of a concrete example that was mentioned to me by a leader in Saudi Arabia. So he said, take the Chinese deciding that they want to find a cure for a certain kind of cancer. They have no guardrails, right? So they can deploy all of their AI, do all the testing, without any hindrance, and find a cure, say, in a year or two. In the United States, because of our regulation, because of all the and the red tape, etc., it would take 10 years. So we would be completely out-competed, as it were, by the Chinese. And the Gulf states are the sort of the incubators where we could deploy this stuff without any of our own kind of restrictions.
So they have the capital, the land, the energy, and the regulatory environment that will.
Right.
So this could actually be the game changer then.
That's right.
That's fascinating. So I was not completely on top of all that when President Trump went, and I looked at it from a different angle. I was really struck by the decision on Syria. Because it seemed, I think, that Mohammed bin Salman asked Donald Trump to soften the American position on the interim government of Ashara in Damascus and to lift the sanctions, and President Trump complied, and he also did so in consultation with President Erdogan. And this is really striking to me that I think it's for this trip at least, Donald Trump was viewing the Middle East through the prism of Riyadh and Ankara. And given all the bad feeling that there has been in recent years between Riyadh and Ankara, it's also striking that the two of them, I don't know how closely they're working together, but they have pretty much the same picture of the region, that they are of where they would like to see the region go, focused on stabilizing Syria, and they're transmitting that picture to Washington, and that to me suggests enormous opportunity. Obviously, Donald Trump's goal in the trip was to come away with a story for the American electorate, for his base, about economic cooperation with the United States and the Gulf states. But there's another dimension here, which is the sort of the regional security dimension. And for the first time since I have been following the Middle East, I think we can really imagine a Pax Americana in the Middle East, if we put to rest the Iran threat once and for all. And that's the big question I have in my mind, is whether Donald Trump will do that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Before we go back to Syria and Iran, there is something I found fascinating, that this visit was not any visit. It seems that he went and he delivered. There were actual deliverables on key sectors. You mentioned AI, but also others where the United States was just out and the Chinese were dominating big time. They were also thinking of dominating the post-war reconstruction talks regarding Syria. And do you think now that Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East is following a certain type of pattern where they are reinserting U.S., the United States power in sectors where they've been left behind?
I mean, I think that President Trump is a real estate guy. And if you look at the world and where are things happening, where are things being built, and also where are things being built where things can happen just because of the force of character and the will of a single leader, say Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE, or Sheikh Tamim in Qatar, or MBS in Saudi Arabia. And I think he sees opportunities there for American businesses. He also sees that, in the competition with China, you really have to bring these countries on side completely, and in structural ways, not just in sort of transactional ways. So he's often accused of just being transactional. Here, I think actually he was thinking very strategically. And he also shares the vision with people like MBS of wanting stability and progress and development and economic prosperity. I mean, that's the American view of the world in general, but that's certainly the view that he shares with MBS. So I think there's kind of like a philosophical meeting of minds, and a financial one as well, that comes into play. And I think the Syria thing is indeed very important, but essentially the Saudis view the Turks as playing the dominant role in Syria because they are the patrons of Ahmed al-Shara, but they don't want the Turks to completely dominate Syria. They want part of that action as well. They want to have influence in that region. And so they're pushing to try to come to an accommodation with the Turks, and which is in keeping with how the Saudis want to sort of reach agreements with, including Israel, on a variety of different files to basically stop conflict and war, so as to get on with the business of building and diversifying their own economy. It's very much driven from an internal domestic agenda. And I think President Trump understands that and is willing to sort of help with this. And we should talk about Iran, of course, because the Saudis also have changed their view on Iran. They were very much with Israel against the JCPOA agreement, against President Obama's views. Now they seem to want to reach an accommodation with Iran. And I have some ideas as to why they want to do that. And it's not because they love Iran, but they want to sort of keep it at bay.
Very interesting. We'll get back to that. Mike?
I'm moving in the same direction because it puts Donald Trump, this picture that we're developing, puts Donald Trump in before a significant decision that he has to make. Because the first Middle Eastern leader that he met with before, after he took office, was, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu. I think that was the first head of state that he, or head of government that he met with after the election. And Netanyahu said, "We have an historic opportunity to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, and we want to do it now. There's a window. The window will close if we don't exploit it." And of course, Donald Trump said, "No, wait. Let's wait. I want to try to do this through negotiation." And Netanyahu is cooling his jets off to one side, but he's clearly getting antsy about the negotiations, and putting pressure on Trump to actually dismantle the Iranian nuclear program. Personally, I do not believe that the Iranians are going to negotiate the dismantlement of their program. So as the clock ticks, at a certain point, President Trump is going to have to make a decision. And he's hearing very different things from the Saudis and the Turks than he's hearing from the Israelis. Because the Saudis and the Turks are saying that the way to stabilize the region is to restrain the Israelis and come to some kind of an agreement with the Iranians. Personally, I don't think the Saudis and the Turks have it right on this issue, but that's not necessarily where Donald Trump is going to come down, and he's going to have to make this decision sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So Bernard, what are they hearing from the Saudis?
Okay, so let me explain the Saudi point of view as they see Iran. So essentially, after October 7th and Israel's phenomenal victories against the non-state actors backed by Iran, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, some of the Shiite militias in Iraq, and also the toppling of President Assad in Syria, which would not have happened, by the way, without Israel's crushing of the Iranian presence in Syria. So that's a spectacular victory across this arc that runs from Iran all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean. But the Iranians in the Persian Gulf are not diminished in terms of their power and their ability to create a lot of damage and havoc. And what the Iranians have basically told the Saudis is that if we're attacked by the Israelis and the Americans, or both, we're going to retaliate. If we're existentially threatened, we're going to retaliate against you, not against the Americans or the Israelis. We're going to blow up your oil fields. We're going to blow up your desalination plants. We're going to blow up your electricity generation plants in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And they have the capacity to do that because the distances are extremely short. You don't have the capability of defending against swarms of cruise ballistic missiles and drones from the Iranians. So they still are formidable in that zone. So someone like the leader in Saudi Arabia, MBS, or for that matter, MBZ, is confronted with a situation where essentially they want to see Iran weakened. They would love to see the Iranian nuclear program dismantled, but they don't want to see all their oil fields burning and towers in Dubai, blown up, because that would be the end for them, and extremely costly. And they don't have the capability of defending themselves. So that's why they're kind of adopting this, let's see if we can reach some sort of accommodation with Iran. It's essentially Iran playing the classic card of, I'm going to be the arsonist here.
Yeah.
I'm going to blow the place up. And unless you put pressure, unless the Americans come to some sort of accommodation and stop the Israelis from attacking us. That's the basic kind of position that MBS has understood.
And I may explain then the Turkish position as well, which is a little bit different. The Turks don't feel they come out in the same place in terms of what they want American policy to be, but from a different set of calculations. The Turks don't feel the threat from the Iranian the Iranian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. The most stable borders that Iran has are with Turkey and Turkey's ally Azerbaijan, because the Turks the Iranians are actually very fearful of Turkish and Azerbaijani capabilities, and so there's really the Iranians are deterred against the Turks and the Azerbaijanis in a way that they're not deterred against anybody else around them. But the Turks want stability, and they want to focus on economic growth, just like the Saudis do. And the Turks see an historic opportunity, if not to solve the Turkish PKK threat conflict, at least to take it to a completely new stage. One that's much better for the Turks, to stabilize their border. They don't trust at all any American regime change policy, and they fear that an effort to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, basically a war to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, however circumscribed the war is, could easily become a regime change program, if not by the Americans and the Israelis themselves, by the actions of the Iranian people. This could lead to who knows what kind of chaos and what effect it will have on Turkey, Syria. So it's a stability argument. They regard this Turkish government especially regards the Israelis as the destabilizing element in the region. So they want the United States to restrain it.
Very interesting. Bernard, I would like to go back to the Saudi thinking on this, because they were on the Israel side before. What changed that? Was there a moment where they thought this is just not working and they normalized with Iran through Beijing? Why did they take that route? What was the trigger?
So I think that something happened in Saudi Arabia around 2020, 2021, during and right after COVID. Essentially, the Saudis realized that they have to get on with the business of diversifying their economy. To do that, they cannot have Houthi missiles flying. Yeah. They can't be, constantly under threat, because if you have instability and war and attacks on Saudi Arabia, you can't bring tourists, you can't attract foreign direct investment. You basically can't get on with the economic project of reconstituting the economy and the society, the whole kind of social transformation. And so they went from being super hawkish, forward-leaning, MBS calling Khamenei a Hitler, to saying we want zero problems with everybody. They made that switch, and I think it was a switch that happened because there was a new team of advisors around MBS, and he himself realized that it's impossible to get on with what he wants to get on with. And then there's the specific Iranian threat, right? So I think what he saw with Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah and Syria is that they have incredible capabilities and deterrence capabilities and also capabilities that are offensive that he simply doesn't have. So it's also kind of a realization, an internalization of the weaknesses and that makes Saudi Arabia vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what I think explains it.
Mike,
can I add one more thing to that?
Go ahead.
Which is I think we also did this to the Saudi.
I was going to ask you, how do you interpret it is it a foreign policy failure?
Yes, it's an American foreign policy failure, and I think the Saudi position is indicative of all of our allies in the Middle East, which we have whipsawed because of our internal polarization, the internal polarization in the United States. We have started to categorize countries around the world as Republican countries and Democratic countries, and Republican leaders and Democratic leaders. And Mohammed bin Salman, because of the close cooperation with Donald Trump, and because of his forward-leaning policy against Iran that coincided with Trump's the first Trump and the first administration, he got designated by Joe Biden as a Democrat. I mean, as a Republican, and not just as a Republican, but as a Trump Republican. So one of the two first things that Joe Biden did when he took office in 2021 is he demonized Mohammed bin Salman. Remember, they resurrected this CIA report on the killing of Khashoggi and declassified it, and they demanded they made a big deal about. Remember, the Democratic propaganda back then was that the worst humanitarian crisis in the world was Yemen, and it was being caused by the Saudis, and so therefore we had to delist the Houthis. And Mohammed bin Salman got the message. He got the message loud and clear. And about, a month or two after Biden took office, he went on a major television interview and he said, "We want Iran to be a successful country, and we want to have good relations with Iran," and so on. So he got the message that he's being demonized, the Houthis are being elevated. He's being pressured to get out of Yemen completely because the United States has a new policy toward Iran, and he's in the way. And he got too close to Trump. So they've learned their lesson. If I think his calculation is twofold. In addition to all the things that Bernie said, one is that if we, Saudi Arabia, get too far out. If we adopt the same position as the Israelis about the Iranian nuclear program and so on, we can't be guaranteed that tomorrow the Americans won't shift and adopt a policy of reconciliation with the Iranians, and then we're left on the battlefield alone opposite the Iranians, who are going to extract a price from us for our position. And alternatively, this could happen within a presidency, within a Biden presidency or a Trump presidency, or between presidents. If we get too far out on this, then we're going to be held accountable by the next American president. So they have adopted a kind of neutral position, and so that no one is going to hold them responsible for whatever violence takes place.
Yeah, thank you for this grand perspective, because it seems that people really have a short memory that the Biden administration delisted the Houthis from being a foreign terrorist organization. And here's my question to you both. Did China benefit from this? Is Iran benefiting now from all of this? Precisely because they have been weakened. I mean, they have the nuclear program, but also the non-nuclear one, with what you mentioned, Bernard, with the proxies and all the other tools they're using. Who is really benefiting now?
So, on the issue of Yemen, by the way, the Biden administration, along with a lot of the press that supported it, claimed that there were several 100,000 killed in Yemen by the Saudis. That's simply not true. If you look at actually UN statistics, we're talking in the 10,000, 10 to 20,000. So, I mean, there was just enormous exaggeration and vilification of the regime, as Mike said. The other thing I would say also is that the Biden administration in the last 2 years did change its orientation towards Saudi Arabia, and it changed largely because of oil prices.
Yeah, because of energy.
Yeah, I mean, the midterm elections were coming in 2022. People were predicting a red wave, and the oil price. I don't know if you remember this, but after we came out of COVID, the price of the gallon in places like California was $7, and so the Biden people realized, Saudi Arabia is really important if you want to bring down the price of oil. So they sent Jake Sullivan and asked the Saudis, after having vilified them, to increase production, which the Saudis said, no, we're not going to do that. And then he did it again just in July when Biden went and did that famous fist bump. But the Biden people actually did realize that they had to abandon the kind of let's call it the extreme left, Democrat view on Saudi and become much more willing to engage with them. And different agreements were then being negotiated with the Saudis, which President Trump has now essentially inherited. The agreements on mutual defense, on nuclear, on free trade, AI, and so on. So that was all started in the second half of the Biden administration. Now, in terms of Iran, I think, look, if you're Iran and you look at the region, what do you want to do? You want to be, definitely you'd like to have non-state actors and control a land bridge from Iran all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean. But that they've lost. And you want to be able to capture the Palestinian cause. That they seem to have also lost, right? But that's, while important, what's even more important to Iran is to be able to block the Strait of Hormuz and be able to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And what they have with the Houthis is the ability to block maritime shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So that doesn't, despite the multiple attacks on the Houthis, they seem to have still been able to really affect maritime trade if they want to in those two straits, which also means Suez would be, because if you block Bab el-Mandeb, you block Suez. So, in that respect, the Iranians remain quite strong. And what's interesting is that when the Americans were very annoyed with the Houthis because of the attacks that began, I think, in November 2023 on maritime shipping across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea, the Americans decided to go to the Chinese and ask them for help. So they went to I think Jake Sullivan went to China. Yeah, so he went to Beijing and he asked the Chinese whether they could talk to the Iranians to put pressure on the Houthis to stop attacking shipping.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. So what did the Chinese do? It's fascinating. Rather than put pressure on the Houthis through the Iranians, they cut a deal with the Houthis.
Yeah, to not hit
Chinese shipping.
Yes.
And you could see that in insurance rates. The Chinese ships had very low insurance rates. Everyone else had very high insurance rates. So they cut their own deal, which tells you something about how the Chinese operate and that they're basically not stakeholders in the kind of, the stability of the region, the maritime shipping, security, safety, and so on. No, they don't have that commitment that the Americans have and that the Saudis would want them to have. They're kind of on their own, doing their own thing.
Yeah,
we still haven't learned. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. On that note, just because I remember the discourse at the time was that, the Houthis are blocking the Red Sea and they are hitting shipments, but the other party would say, they're not hitting everyone. Yes, they're not hitting the Chinese and the Russians because they're on their side.
That's right.
Yes.
So a couple things on this. One is that we haven't learned our lesson. When the Chinese built their base in Djibouti, which is the first base not on the China coast China ever built, the naval base. The American Navy, I kid you not, welcomed it because this was still we still had the belief that what we were doing was cultivating China to become a responsible stakeholder. Back then, there was the issue of the Somali pirates, and so the American Navy said, the Chinese are here to help us with the Somali pirates. When no, they're actually thinking about how to control all of the choke points around the world in global trade. Of course, Chinese company, a Chinese company, is providing the Houthis now with targeting data.
Yeah.
So China is actually helping the Houthis to target everyone. And this visit of, or this effort of Jake Sullivan to enlist the Chinese to become responsible stakeholders, it really is laughable because of what it reveals about a misunderstanding of how the Chinese operate and how the Middle East operates. If you're sitting in Riyadh or Cairo, where nobody is feeling no one is feeling the pressure on international shipping more than the Egyptians, who have lost all the revenue through the Suez Canal. If you're sitting in Cairo and you say to the Americans, "We need your help on this," and the American answer is to call up Xi Jinping
Yes.
and to ask the Chinese for help, then you ask yourself, why do I have this relationship with the Americans? Why do I need a middleman to go to the Chinese to ask for help? I'll just go to the Chinese directly. So American policy under the Biden administration was really pushing our allies to Beijing, shockingly so. And it's the same thing with the Iran policy. Bernie mentioned that there was the shift halfway through the Biden administration when they realized, oh wow, Saudi Arabia has historically, they realized historically there were these levers that we pulled in order to regulate the price of oil around the globe. One of the levers was connected to the Saudis. But in the meantime, the policy of Obama and Biden, by courting Iran, had cut the cords between the lever and the Saudis on the other end. But so the Biden administration tried to recreate it. They had some success, but not as much as they wanted. At the same time, they also rediscovered Saudi-Israeli normalization.
Yes.
Which they had poo-pooed, or actually, they were derisive about it because the Trump administration had said it's the next step in the Abraham Accords, and the Biden administration said when they came in they wouldn't even say Abraham Accords. Then they rediscovered it, but they really rediscovered it as a shiny ball to throw in the corner so the pro-Israel community would run after it, because this signaled Saudi-Israeli normalization, talking about it and promoting it. That signaled to the pro-Israel community that falsely, it was a false signal that the Biden administration was trying to, pardon me, put together a coalition against Iran, but it wasn't. We know that the Biden administration effectively, through non-enforcement, removed the sanctions on Iranian oil sales to China. They built up the Iranian Chinese. Their policy built up the Iranian Chinese connection, and of course, so then with their right hand they're strengthening Iran, and with their left hand they're trying to promote Saudi-Israeli normalization and pretending that that's going to weaken Iran. And so, what was Iran's response? October 7th, which has really effectively destroyed Saudi-Israeli normalization for years to come. How many years? I don't know, but certainly we're not going to see it this year, and likely not next year. So there was this contradiction at the heart of the policy, which was pushing our ally, which was strengthening Iran, which was the Chinese instrument for projecting Chinese influence into the region, and pushing our allies toward China to regulate to manage the contradiction that our policy created. Now we're in a much better position because Israel has destroyed half of Iran's assets around the region, and Donald Trump has come to the Gulf and wants a special relationship with these countries, and is working to solidify the American position there. So I think that for the moment, China has been weakened, but we're still suffering from the contradiction at the heart of our policy, which I hope Donald Trump will solve.
This is very interesting because what do you make of the Yemen question? It seems that there were some movements from the Trump administration to at least deteriorate the Houthis, make sure that they cannot hit anymore. But at some point, the operation got so big that they were considering a ground invasion, and they could not do it because I guess for Saudi Arabia, it's not the time. Also, Trump was visiting. What do you make of this?
So, I mean, the Saudis and other Gulf countries definitely would like to see this group called the Houthis, a non-state actor with a very strange ideology, very radical ideology, either weakened or eliminated. But the Saudis won't join forces with the United States in the attack, except through intelligence sharing. But they won't join the attack on the Houthis because they're worried that the Americans start something and then not finish it, and then the Houthis will retaliate against the Saudis. So they don't want to be sort of left, out to hang, because the Americans don't finish the job. So the situation in Yemen is one where very complicated situation. You have an internal civil war. You have many different actors. The Saudis and the Emiratis are not on the same page when it comes to who they should back internally. And what the Saudis would ultimately, I think, want is for the Houthis to be degraded to such a point that they end up losing. And one way to do that is to decapitate the leadership.
I'm sorry, before you continue, can you tell us more about why the UAE and Saudi Arabia are not on the same page? I think that would be interesting for
you. So the Saudis are principally worried about the northern part of Yemen where the Houthis are. And that's really the problem for them because they're right against the border of Saudi Arabia. And the UAE is much more interested in the southern part of Yemen, which faces the ocean, the Arabian Sea. And the UAE has basically a policy almost of like imperial mercantile control of this region. So they want to control the ports, they want to have bases along the southern coast of Yemen. They want to control an island called Socotra, which is off of the Horn of Africa. They want to have a base in the Sudan. So the UAE has a policy in the region that is expansionist. And the Saudis basically don't approve of this and don't understand why the UAE, which is a tiny little country, has this sort of massive ambition, which is oversized. It's too big for its capabilities. And the Saudis essentially want the Yemenis to stop the war and to basically get on with the business of rebuilding the country and weakening the Houthis. So they're very different sort of policies and views on the country and on the future. The UAE also wouldn't mind, is backing separatist movements, so would like Yemen to splinter. The Saudis would like the country to remain united. So those are the basic differences between them.
Very interesting. Sorry, to continue your remark on Yemen and the Trump.
Yeah, so I think, from the Saudi point of view, there's some problems that don't have immediate solutions and that need to be managed. And one of them is the question of the Houthis, is how do you manage this problem? Ideally, I think and this would be my view on how to deal with the Houthis, is if you have really good intelligence and you decapitate the leadership of the Houthis, the way the Israelis did with Hezbollah in Lebanon, you could destroy that. You could destroy the movement. But it seems clear that the Americans, the Saudis, and the Israelis don't have that kind of intelligence and are not able to get after the Houthi leadership.
Very interesting.
It's interesting, this difference that Bernie's talking about between the Saudis and the Emiratis. There's possibly a dimension to this, which is the UAE-Israeli relationship. And I'm speculating here because I don't really know anything about UAE-Israeli discussions about Yemen and Socotra and so on. But it wouldn't surprise me if it's going on because in general terms, and this is not speculation, in general terms, the UAE is the Arab country that the Israelis are closest to. It's very interesting when I talk to Turkish officials, when the Turks look at Syria, And when they're looking at when they're thinking about Syria, and they look at the UAE, they see Israel. And when they look at Israel, they see the UAE. They're like for the Turks on the Syria question, the Israelis and the UAE are like Siamese twins. It's a fascinating dimension of the geopolitical mix these days, and I wonder if it doesn't have some kind of impact. Do you have any idea about that? Is it having any impact in Israel's Yemen policy and the UAE's Yemen policy?
I think that I mean the Israelis, as you know, have attacked Yemen several times, but they, they weren't paying attention to Yemen. I don't think they were completely blindsided by the Houthis, and it takes years to build that kind of capacity and capability. And it seems to me that the UAE would be more than willing to help the Israelis in Yemen, but also it does not have that intelligence itself and that capability. At least in the south it does, but not in the north, which is where the Houthis are.
Very interesting. And sorry, but I thought I should ask you too about Sudan, about the civil war. How does Riyadh see that?
Yeah, this is another point of contention between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So again, in keeping with this obsession with stability and order and ending wars, the Saudis want the war in the Sudan to end because they're worried ultimately that they might end up with lots of refugees from the Sudan. They already have actually close to 1 million Sudanese living in Saudi Arabia. And while they're not crazy about the military in the Sudan, they've more or less backed the army in the Sudan. The reason they don't like it especially is because it's full of Muslim brothers, okay? And the Saudis have an allergy, but not quite as much of an allergy to the Muslim brothers as the UAE. The UAE refuses to deal with the army in the Sudan because it is a Muslim Brotherhood army, and has decided to support what are called the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. And the RSF are basically a bunch of, genocidal militia, I think is a fair way to kind of describe them. They go around rampaging and killing Sudanese of African origin, like the Masalit tribes and so on. The UAE has backed them. I'm not quite sure why, but presumably because they have an ambition to have bases and have influence in the Sudan.
Does it have to do with mining in Darfur?
I mean, there is a question of mining, also gold and so on. But I think it's more that the RSF is not Islamist, and the RSF would give the UAE all kinds of privileges and benefits if they took over the Sudan. And the UAE has an interest in being present on the Red Sea. And so the Saudis are kind of, essentially the Saudis think, what's the UAE doing? First of all, why does it need to have a base on the Red Sea? And second, why are they backing this group? It seems, counterproductive to do that. So again, this is a major point of difference. And the UAE doesn't necessarily want to see an end to the war, whereas the Saudis does want to see an end to the war and doesn't really care how the war ends. As far just let it end.
Yeah.
Sorry if I can have a follow up with this. When the Saudis ask the Emiratis, why do you want this? What do the Emiratis say to them?
Well, I think often the Emiratis deny that they're involved in the way that they're involved.
There's no real discussion.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to the Emiratis, they say, no, we're not backing the RSF.
Okay.
They won't acknowledge it.
That's very interesting. And so, Mike, what do you make of this in terms of where should U.S. foreign policy go forward when your own allies are bickering?
That's the situation we're always in the Middle East. I think this is, if I can make a pitch for us.
Go ahead.
This is why we need to exist. We, the Hudson Institute, and people like us, because there's no power in the region that the United States can, whose worldview the United States can simply adopt and promote. There are those that we can be closer to. But none of them have the same set of interests that we have around the region. And all of them are very good at presenting to the United States a picture of the American interest that actually is designed to enhance their very particular goals. And so I think we have to keep our eyes on a couple of very, very simple propositions. And those are the ones that I was pushing before. Number one, we have to end the Iranian nuclear program. We're not going to hear that from the Turks. We're not going to hear that from the Saudis. Believe me, if we eliminate the Iranian nuclear program, however we do it, nobody's going to complain in Ankara, and nobody's going to complain in Riyadh. Unless, of course, I mean, like as Bernie mentioned, that the Iranians have said to the Saudis, we will destroy your economy, we will do this, we will do that. That, again, is the job of the United States. The United States needs to make it very clear to Ali Khamenei that if an Iranian manufactured missile, doesn't matter who fires it, collapses the Burj Khalifa or cuts off the water supply to Riyadh, that Ali Khamenei will die. That we are the only power in the world that can give that kind of guarantee and put a security, put our allies under a security umbrella. It's not one of the problems you hear in the United States these days is there are a lot of people saying our allies should take care of themselves. They can't. They don't have the capability. Only the United States, really, Israel to a certain extent can, Turkey to a certain extent can, but in certain contexts. But really, it's only the United States that can guarantee their security. And that is the thing that they want more than anything else. All of the talk that we've had in recent decades about our soft power and so forth is a lot of nonsense. What the number one thing that the Middle Easterners want from us is security. The number two thing they want is economic cooperation. Everything else pales in consideration. So destroy the Iranian nuclear program and keep the Turks and the Israelis from bumping up against each other in Syria. That's because the United States is pulling back. I mean, the American electorate doesn't want large-scale deployments of American forces to the Middle East. It doesn't want that, and that's what's leading Donald Trump and others to think about lessening the American military footprint in the region. This is, I think, inevitable that we're going to have this discussion. It has to be done intelligently so that we don't end up enhancing the vulnerabilities of our allies and thereby pushing them to China or to take hedge toward Tehran. And having said that, now I lost the train of my thought. I was going to make another point, but I'm old and suffering from Alzheimer's, and I lost it.
Well, I have another one last point I would like for each one of you to make. And
the point I was going to make was going to be the highlight of the whole video.
Well, please go ahead.
No, I lost it. Okay. It's gone.
So it's more. Are you cautiously optimistic after this visit? What's your, if you have to say a few sentences?
Oh, I mean, I think the American relationship with the Gulf countries is extremely strong and is stronger than it's ever been. And I think, as I said, if we have this structural shift in terms of military and technology and AI and all that, then that's a huge win for America vis-a-vis China. So I am optimistic about that. The big unknown is Iran. And that's and how to deal with Iran. I agree with Mike that the nuclear program has to be dismantled. How that's done, what the consequences of that would be, not just in terms of attacks on the Persian Gulf countries, the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, but also what would happen. And here I share the view of the Turks, and I think this is something that the Saudis worry about, which is if you dismantle, if you take apart the regime in Iran, what would happen? Would you end up with a civil war in Iran? We're talking 80+ million people. That's a scary thought, right? Yeah. I mean, most politicians don't like unpredictable situations and very unstable situations. And Iran is, by definition, the most unstable and destabilizing power in the region. And it's by design a destabilizing power. It's an anti-status quo power. It's a revisionist power, and it's ultimately, a country that has to be contained and has to be made to behave like a nation and not like a revolutionary cause. To go back to what Kissinger once said about it. And that can only be done, I think, through deterrence and coercive capability.
Mike, cautiously optimistic, very optimistic. We shall see with Iran.
I'm cautiously optimistic. The Middle East today, as I said before, I've never seen it like it is today. You can imagine, and this is a flight of fancy now. It's a flight of fancy. But I can imagine if I had a private jet, that I could imagine a Middle East in which I could have breakfast, sunrise in Beirut, and then go have lunch in Tel Aviv, and then fly to the Gulf, have dinner in Riyadh, and then fly to Tehran and party the night away in Tehran. We're within the ability to imagine this. Of course, standing in the way is Iran, the Iranian regime, but there's a vision. I think all of the leaders of the Middle East, despite all of the tensions over Gaza right now, all of the leaders in the Middle East right now want all of the responsible leaders in the Middle East want stability and prosperity. There's only one major power that doesn't. Of course, it's also backed by China and Russia. But I don't think the Chinese and the Russians are so influential that they could stop us from frustrating all of the worst agendas of the Iranians. So it makes me cautiously optimistic. But I've been working on this for decades now. It's always a mistake to get too optimistic about the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, let's take a few questions. We have 4 minutes left, so in case someone has any questions. Well, I guess not.
I remembered. We can end because I remembered the point I wanted to make.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it was one I make all the time, so I don't know why I forgot it. Which is, I was just going to say about the Israelis and the Turks in Syria, that the United States is pulling back militarily, and it only has 2 allies that have the ability to project power beyond their borders militarily, and that's Turkey and Israel. They have very different visions of the region, and so on. So the United States cannot simply designate one of them as its action arm in lieu of its own military. We have to work with the 2 of them. They don't get along with each other. So our job is to separate them with a buffer in Syria, and then work with them in their specific areas and on their specific issues. That requires a unique American strategic vision toward the region, and we can't simply contract any of it to anyone else. But that highlights the importance of Syria, of stabilizing Syria and creating there a buffer that will prevent the Israelis and the Turks from butting up against each other militarily. That's a disaster for American strategy if our 2 most powerful militarily powerful allies are at loggerheads with each other in Syria. Unfortunately, historically, the United States doesn't see Syria. We're kind of blind to it. So I hope the Trump administration stays focused on this. The recent signs are very good. Thanks to Azerbaijani mediation, there's now a hotline between the Turks and the Israelis to prevent a deconfliction hotline, military deconfliction hotline, to prevent unwanted clashes. But this is going to require sustained diplomatic effort by the United States to prevent that from happening. This is another area where I think the Saudi vision of the region can be very helpful, and the Saudi desire to play a role in Syria can be very helpful to the overall project.
Very interesting. Saudi vision can be very helpful. And on this note, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Mike, for all your comments. And see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.